The United States thought it could bring China to its knees with an all-out economic assault, crippling its manufacturing by cutting off access to critical materials. But instead of collapsing under pressure, China did the unthinkable. It launched a counterstrike that hit Detroit harder than anyone ever imagined. Now, American automakers are trapped in a nightmare, having to deal with sky-high production costs, dwindling global influence, and a market being rapidly overtaken by Chinese innovation. This is the story of how China didn't just withstand America's economic attack, but turned it into an opportunity to cripple the US auto industry and cement itself as the world's new automotive superpower. The US pulled the trigger, but missed its target. It all started when the United States government, determined to regain control over global trade, imposed sweeping tariffs on billions of dollars worth of Chinese goods, including steel, aluminum, and auto parts. The message was clear. Washington wanted to curb China's manufacturing dominance, protect American jobs, and force Beijing into what it called fair trade. At first, it seemed like a bold, strategic move. American leaders believed these tariffs would drive up costs for Chinese automakers, weaken their industry, and ultimately push more car production back to the US. If China struggled to access key materials, the logic went, American factories could reclaim their former glory, and Detroit could rise again. But what happened next was something Washington never saw coming. Instead of buckling under the pressure, China counterattacked with devastating precision. Beijing didn't just retaliate with tariffs of its own. It outmaneuvered the US by doubling down on its manufacturing strength, forging new trade partnerships, and accelerating its dominance in electric vehicles. As the US fought to protect its industries with tariffs and restrictions, China adapted, evolved, and found new ways to thrive. What was supposed to be an economic chokehold on China turned into a self-inflicted wound for America's auto industry, one that may never fully heal. China's counterattack, the EV revolution. Rather than retreat under the weight of US tariffs, China saw the challenge as an opportunity. Instead of engaging in a trade war on America's terms, it made a calculated pivot, betting big on the future of transportation, electric vehicles. While Washington was busy imposing restrictions, Beijing was pouring billions into battery technology, EV production, and global expansion. The results were nothing short of stunning. Within just a few years, China emerged as the undisputed leader in electric vehicle production, leaving American automakers scrambling to keep pace. By 2023, China exported over 5 million EVs, surpassing Japan to become the world's largest auto exporter. Brands like BYD, NIO, and XPeng flooded international markets with high-tech, affordable electric cars, while American manufacturers struggled to match their efficiency and scale. One of the biggest ironies is that Tesla, the US's crown jewel in EV innovation, was thriving in China. The Shanghai Gigafactory, operating at full capacity, became Tesla's most productive plant, churning out EVs faster and cheaper than its US counterparts. Meanwhile, legacy American automakers like Ford and General Motors were staggering under rising production costs, struggling with outdated infrastructure, and falling behind in battery technology. And to make matters worse, the very tariffs designed to cripple China ended up crippling the US auto industry instead. Steel and aluminum prices skyrocketed, making it more expensive to build cars in America. Supply chains, once a well-oiled machine, began to collapse under the weight of restrictions and geopolitical uncertainty. While China surged forward with cutting-edge EVs and expanding global exports, American automakers were left fighting an uphill battle, one they were never prepared for. But the real consequences of this trade war is about to hit home in America. As China flooded global markets with affordable EVs, US car prices skyrocketed, and once loyal American consumers began looking elsewhere. The price of tariffs. American cars become unaffordable. The US government believed tariffs would protect American industry, but instead they sent manufacturing costs soaring. Steel, aluminum, and key electronic components became significantly more expensive, forcing automakers to pass those costs onto consumers. Suddenly, buying an American-made vehicle, especially an electric one, became a luxury few could afford. Companies like Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler, once the heart of American innovation, were now struggling to compete. Their vehicles, already burdened by outdated production production methods and high labor costs couldn't match the affordability of Chinese-made EVs flooding global markets. Consumers weren't just paying more, they were getting less. The numbers told the brutal truth. The average cost of an American-made electric vehicle soared beyond $50,000, pricing out millions of potential buyers. Meanwhile, Chinese brands like BYD and NIO were selling feature-packed high-tech EVs at nearly half the price, sometimes as low as $25,000. Even with import fees, these cars were becoming the go-to choice in Europe, Asia, and even parts of South America. And while Tesla remained the US's EV powerhouse, even it wasn't immune to the effects of rising costs at home. In America, Tesla faced shrinking profit margins and slowing sales due to expensive domestic production and competition from new entrants. Meanwhile, its Shanghai Gigafactory was thriving, producing some of the cheapest and most profitable Teslas in the world. As American automakers bled money and lost global influence, one harsh reality became clear. The tariffs meant to weaken China had only weakened the US auto industry. China expands its grip, America is left behind. While the US was caught up in a costly trade war, China was executing a global expansion strategy that would leave American automakers scrambling to catch up. Instead of engaging in a tit-for-tat tariff battle, China forged new trade deals across Europe, Africa, and Latin America, ensuring its electric vehicles became the go-to choice for millions of consumers worldwide. Countries like Germany, France, and the UK saw a surge in Chinese EV imports, driven by their affordability and cutting-edge technology. European automakers, once dominant in the luxury and economy car markets, now face fierce competition from brands like BYD, NIO, and XPeng, which were offering vehicles that were cheaper, more efficient, and packed with next-generation features. Meanwhile, American automakers were losing ground fast. Burdened by high production costs and a lack of strategic global partnerships, they found themselves locked out of the fastest-growing EV markets. US car companies, desperate to stay competitive, tried to shift production to Mexico, Vietnam, and other low-cost regions, but no country could match China's vast industrial ecosystem and supply chain efficiency. The result? China was winning the global EV war, and the US auto industry was falling further behind. While Chinese automakers secured dominance in international markets, American brands were left struggling with tariffs, supply shortages, and an uncertain future. The US had fired the first shot in the trade war, but now it was paying the ultimate price. The inevitable consequences: US industry on the brink. The consequences of the trade war are no longer hypothetical. They are playing out in real time, and the future of the US auto industry has never looked more uncertain. With China's rapid rise and America's declining competitiveness, the writing is on the wall. Detroit is on the verge of collapse. Thousands of American workers have already lost their jobs. Factories that once symbolized American industrial strength now sit idle or operate at a fraction of their former capacity. Automakers like Ford and General Motors have been forced to slash production, lay off workers, and delay investments in next-generation vehicles. The very companies that once led the global auto industry are now desperate to survive in a world that has moved on without them. Meanwhile, Chinese automakers are thriving. Their EVs dominate the global market, offering cutting-edge technology at prices that American manufacturers simply cannot match. China has not just survived US economic pressure, it has emerged as the new auto superpower, and there's no sign of its momentum slowing down. And the worst part? This was America's own doing. By pulling the trigger on China, Washington inadvertently crippled its own auto industry. What started as a strategy to protect American jobs and industry has instead led to a historic decline in US manufacturing. Now, the question is no longer how to beat China, it's whether America's auto industry can survive at all. Can the US recover? So, is there hope? Can the United States still compete with China in the global auto market, or has the balance of power irreversibly shifted in China's favor? In a desperate bid to reclaim its position, the US government is now pouring billions into revitalizing its auto industry. Massive investments in electric vehicle infrastructure, battery production, and semiconductor manufacturing are underway. New legislation such as the Inflation Reduction Act is designed to boost domestic EV production and reduce reliance on Chinese supply chains. But with China's dominance growing every day, the question remains: is it too late? While the US is still trying to get its EV supply chain off the ground, China has already mastered it. Chinese automakers control everything from lithium mining to battery production, giving them a decisive edge in both cost and innovation. Meanwhile, American companies are still struggling with high production costs, trade restrictions, and a lack of competitive pricing in global markets. The road ahead for the US is steep and uncertain. The decisions made today will define the next generation of the auto industry. Will the government's aggressive investments be enough to close the gap? Can American automakers innovate fast enough to compete with China's rapidly evolving EV sector? Or has the US already fallen too far behind to ever regain its former dominance? What's clear is this: China took America's trade war and turned it into an opportunity. While the US focused on crippling China, Beijing focused on the future and won. Now the US is playing catch up in an industry it once ruled. The question is, will America rise to the challenge, or will it become just another casualty of China's economic rise?